I was fishing with my grandson when my son-in-law stormed in, turned it off, and said, "He doesn't need to be around your kind of people." My daughter just took his hand and left the room. I sat there alone for hours. But on the day of their business loan renewal, they got a call that changed everything. I was sitting in my worn recliner, watching fishing videos with Ben on the old TV. He was curled up next to me, eyes wide with wonder as we watched a guy on a dock pull in a giant bass. Ben's small hand squeezed mine whenever the fisherman's rod bent, and every so often he'd shoot me a grin that lit up my heart. "Grandpa, do you think we could catch one that big?" he asked, his face full of excitement. I chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure we could, buddy. We'll have to head out to the pond behind the house one of these days, see what's biting." The moment was perfect. The kind of quiet afternoon I'd cherished for years, ever since Ben was a baby and my daughter Lisa would drop him off for a few hours so she could get some rest. Those were the best days, just me, the little guy, in the peaceful stillness of the pond. That was, until the door slammed open so hard it rattled the old window panes. I looked up to see Paul, my son-in-law, his face twisted in a scowl as he stepped into the room. He didn't even look at me. His eyes went straight to Ben. "Get up," he barked. "It's time to go." Ben's smile vanished. He looked at me, confusion in his eyes. "But we were gonna." "Now, Ben," Paul snapped, cutting him off. He grabbed his arm and pulled him up off the couch. Lisa trailed in behind him, her head down, eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't say a word, didn't even look at me. My chest tightened. "Paul, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned to me then, his mouth curled in a sneer. "I don't want Ben around you anymore. You're not good for him. He doesn't need to be around. Your type." "My type?" I echoed, feeling like I'd been slapped. My voice cracked. "What does that even mean?" "You know damn well what it means," Paul spat, his hand still gripping Ben's arm. "Come on, Lisa." Lisa hesitated for half a second, then followed him out, never meeting my eyes. The door shut behind them, and the sudden silence felt like a punch to the gut. I sat there, the old chair creaking under me as I stared at the door. My hand shook in my lap, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. My home, once filled with laughter and warmth, felt colder than I'd ever known. I thought about the afternoons Ben and I spent together, watching fishing videos, working in the yard, sitting by the pond, just the two of us. He used to love it here. He'd run through the grass barefoot, his giggles carrying across the water. But Paul didn't see that. He didn't see the love, the quiet joy. All he saw was an old man who'd worked his whole life as a machinist, who didn't have fancy words or a college degree. All he saw was someone he could dismiss. I sat there long after they were gone, the TV still playing in the background, showing the fisherman holding up his prize catch. My eyes were fixed on the screen, but I didn't really see it. I thought about my late wife, how she loved to sit by the pond at sunset, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap. She would have been heartbroken to see this, to see her family pulling away like this. The sun was sinking low behind the pond, casting long shadows across the grass. The water glowed orange, and for a moment, I let myself remember how it used to be. How we'd sit out there in the evenings, a little radio playing softly, a cold beer in my hand and her warm laughter in my ear. But that was gone now. Just like Ben was gone from my living room, taken away without so much as a goodbye. I wiped a hand across my face, trying to steady my breathing. My heart ached, but under the ache was something else. Something like anger. Or maybe it was just a stubborn kind of love. I wasn't going to let Paul take Ben away from me. I wasn't going to let him twist everything I'd worked for, everything I'd given, into something to be ashamed of. As the sun set over the pond, I made myself a promise. I would do whatever it took to protect my family. Even if it meant standing up to Paul, even if it meant digging up secrets and lies I never wanted to see. I wasn't ready to let go of the people I loved. Not yet. A couple of days later, I found myself at Joe's place. He lived in a small brick house on the other side of town, with a yard that was always neatly trimmed and a little stone statue of a fisherman by the porch. Joe and I had been fishing buddies for as long as I could remember. We'd spent years talking about everything and nothing, out there in the quiet of the pond. Joe was a retired accountant, the kind of guy who could make sense of numbers the way I used to make sense of metal and gears. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, he didn't ask any questions. Just gave me a nod and waved me in. "What's going on, Pete?" he asked, leading me into his small kitchen. The place smelled like coffee and old books. I sat down heavily at the table. "It's Paul," I said finally. "He's trying to cut me out of Ben's life. And Lisa, she's just going along with it." Joe poured me a cup of coffee and slid it across the table. "I'm sorry, buddy. That's tough." I took a sip, the warmth settling in my chest. "But there's more to it. I can feel it. Paul's always been, well, let's just say he's always been ambitious. And I know he's been messing around with some real estate deals. He brags about it, like he's some hotshot investor." Joe raised an eyebrow. "Real estate, huh? You think he's hiding something?" I nodded. "I think he's using Lisa. Her name, her credit. She doesn't understand half the stuff he's doing, but she signs whatever he puts in front of her. I've seen him do it. Joe leaned back in his chair, thinking it over. If that's true, we need to get our hands on some documents. Bank statements, property records, loan applications. We need to see how deep it goes. I rubbed a hand over my face. I don't even know where to start. Paul's not exactly the type to leave paperwork lying around. Joe's eyes sparkled, the same way they did when he hooked a big bass out of the water. Leave that part to me. I still have a few contacts at the bank, and I know how to read a balance sheet better than most of these slick real estate guys. He pulled a yellow legal pad from a drawer and started scribbling notes. First thing we do is figure out exactly what properties he's tied to. Then we'll see if Lisa's name is on any of the loans. If it is, we've got leverage. I watched him work, feeling a flicker of hope. Joe, I don't want to drag Lisa into a mess, but if he's using her, I can't just stand by and let it happen. Joe looked up at me, his expression softening. You're not dragging her in, Pete. Paul did that when he put her name on those papers. All you're doing is making sure she knows the truth. He reached across the table, tapping his pen against my knuckles. We'll take it slow. Quiet. No need to spook him until we have the proof. I nodded, feeling a little more like myself. Thanks, Joe. A couple of days later, we met up again at the library downtown. Joe had already pulled some property records from the county clerk's office, and we spent the afternoon hunched over them in the back corner of the reading room. He traced his finger down the pages. Look here. Paul's name is on the initial purchase, but the loans, they're in Lisa's name. Multiple loans, different banks, all tied to commercial properties. My stomach sank. She has no idea. She probably thinks she's just helping him out with paperwork. Joe's jaw tightened. He's building a damn house of cards, Pete. One of these properties misses a payment, and the whole thing collapses. And guess who gets stuck with the bill? Lisa, I said quietly. Joe nodded. Exactly. We worked in silence for a while, flipping through old newspaper articles and public notices. My mind kept drifting back to Ben, to the way his little face crumpled when Paul yanked him out of my living room. I couldn't let this go on. I wouldn't. After a couple of hours, Joe leaned back in his chair. I think I see his game. He's using short-term loans to keep the properties afloat until he can refinance. It's all about timing. If we can tip off the bank before he closes on the new loans, we can stop him cold. I stared at the stack of papers in front of us, feeling the weight of it all. So we just wait for the right moment? Joe nodded. We watch. We gather proof. And when the time's right, we blow it all open. I took a deep breath, feeling a knot in my stomach loosen just a bit. I don't know how to thank you for this, Joe. He gave me a small smile. We're fishing buddies, Pete. This is what we do. We keep each other out of trouble. As I drove home that night, the sun was setting over the pond behind my house, the water catching the last light of the day. I pulled over and sat for a moment, watching the ripples dance across the surface. I thought about Lisa and Ben, and about the man who was tearing them away from me. I thought about Joe, and the quiet strength he carried like a second skin. And I thought about what was coming. The fight. The risk. But also the hope. I wasn't going to let Paul destroy my family's future. Not while I still had a say. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paper and late-night phone calls. Every evening after dinner, I'd head over to Joe's place with a stack of notes and a box of cheap coffee. His kitchen table was always covered in spreadsheets and legal pads, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and determination. Joe was meticulous, more careful than I could ever be. He'd circle numbers in red ink, highlight suspicious signatures, and show me the connections I would have missed. Sometimes he'd chuckle and say, "It's like fishing, Pete. You gotta know when to cast your line and when to reel it in." I'd sit across from him, my hands curled around a chipped coffee mug, watching him work. My mind kept drifting to Ben, wondering if he was okay, if Lisa was safe. I hadn't seen them in weeks. Every time I picked up the phone to call Lisa, my hands would start to shake. Joe was patient with me. "We're close," he'd say whenever he saw me falter. "Just a little longer." One night, I brought over a box I'd found in the attic. Old paperwork, stuff Lisa had left behind when she moved out years ago. Inside, I found an email from Lisa to her mom, my late wife. It was from when Paul first started pushing her into those loans. I read it out loud to Joe, my voice tight. He says it's no big deal, that it's just for a short time. I don't really understand what I'm signing, but he says I should trust him. Joe's face darkened as he took the letter from me. "This is it, Pete. This shows she didn't understand what she was signing. He can't spin this as Lisa was in on it anymore." I nodded, my throat tight. It's her words, not his. We spent hours going over the documents, piecing it all together like a puzzle. Bank statements that didn't add up. Transfers that happened in the middle of the night. And signatures, some of them so shaky and different from Lisa's neat handwriting that even I could see they were fake. Joe tapped one of the forged signatures with his pen. "He forged these, Pete." No doubt about it. My stomach turned, but I felt a surge of relief too. So what now? Joe looked me square in the eye. Now we build a file. We take every shred of this, put it in order, and give it to the bank's fraud division. If we do it right, we can stop him before he finalizes the refinancing. Once that's done, it's too late. He'll have tied Lisa up in a mountain of debt she can't get out of. I took a shaky breath. When's the deadline? Joe checked his notes. First of the month. That gives us about a week. The days that followed were the hardest. My mind was on fire all the time, every waking moment spent thinking about Ben, about Lisa, about how Paul had been using them like pawns in a stupid game. I'd sit by the pond some nights, the water dark and still in the moonlight, and wonder how it all got so messed up. My late wife's voice would come back to me sometimes, calm and gentle, reminding me that family meant fighting for each other, even when it was hard. Finally, the night before the refinancing deadline, Joe called me. I've got it all, he said. I'm going to drive to the bank in the morning and file the report myself. You just sit tight. The next morning, I watched the sun come up over the pond as I waited. My phone sat on the table beside me, silent. I felt like I was holding my breath for the whole world. I thought about Ben's laugh, about the way he used to ask me about every fish we caught, every bird that flew over the pond. I thought about Lisa and the way her shoulders always slumped when Paul was in the room, like she was carrying the weight of his anger. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew this was the right thing. Paul thought he could hide behind his lies and his money. He didn't count on a couple of old men who knew how to dig deeper, how to keep fighting. By the time the sun was high in the sky, Joe called me. It's done, he said. His voice was calm but sure. The bank's fraud division has everything. They're going to put a freeze on the accounts and launch an investigation. I let out a long breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. Thank you, Joe, for everything. Joe just chuckled. We're not done yet, Pete. But this is the first real step. I hung up and stood by the window, watching the pond shimmer in the afternoon light. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. I didn't know what Paul would do when he found out. I didn't know how Lisa would react. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. My family was worth fighting for, and I was ready. 3 days later, the call finally came. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The pond out back shimmered in the late afternoon light, and for a moment, I let myself just sit there in the quiet. Then the phone rang, and everything snapped back into focus. It was Lisa. Her voice was tight, shaky. Dad, she said, and I could hear the tears even though she was trying so hard to keep them in check. I need to come over. Can I bring Ben? Of course, I said immediately, my heart thudding in my chest. You don't even have to ask. 20 minutes later, I heard the tires crunch on the gravel driveway. I opened the door before she even knocked. She stood there, clutching Ben's hand like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she looked so small in that moment, so much like the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. She stepped inside, and Ben gave me a shy smile before burying his face in my side. I wrapped an arm around him, feeling the warmth of him, and for the first time in weeks, the ache in my chest eased just a little. Lisa looked around, her eyes lingering on the old fishing photos on the wall. Paul's furious, she said finally. He's locked out of his accounts. He can't access anything. He's losing it. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Lisa. I know this is a lot. She shook her head. No, I'm glad you did it. I didn't understand how bad it was. I thought he was just stressed. I didn't know he was putting everything in my name. She pulled out a folder from her bag, her hands trembling. These are the letters from the bank. The ones you and Joe must have sent them. They're saying Paul forged some of my signatures. I didn't even know what half of this meant. I took the folder and set it on the table. We didn't want to scare you, I said gently. We just wanted you to see the truth. Paul's been using you, Lisa. He's been using Ben. That's not right. She sat down heavily in the old kitchen chair, her fingers twisting together. I was so angry at first, she admitted. I thought you'd, I don't know, betrayed us. But now, I see it. I see what he's done. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. You've always been stronger than you think, Lisa. You're not alone. Not now, not ever. She nodded, tears spilling over despite her best efforts to hold them back. I don't even know what to do next. He's been sending me these messages, calling me brainwashed, telling me I'm just doing whatever you say. I felt a flicker of anger, hot and bright. That's just Paul trying to keep you scared, trying to make you doubt yourself. Don't listen to him. Ben was sitting quietly beside us, his small hand still gripping mine. I looked at him and gave him a little smile. You okay, buddy? He nodded, his eyes wide. I like it here, Grandpa. It's quiet. Lisa let out a shaky laugh. He's been so brave, she said softly. I don't know how he understands any of this, but he's been my rock. I stood up and opened the cupboard, pulling down the jar of cookies I kept for him. You're safe here, I told them both. Both of you. You can stay as long as you need. Lisa nodded, her shoulders finally starting to relax. I think I need to. At least until I figure out what to do next. I set a plate of cookies in front of Ben, and he beamed up at me. Thanks, Grandpa, he said, his voice small but sure. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt warm again. Even with the mess outside, the threats, the uncertainty, it didn't matter. We were together. We were safe. Lisa took a deep breath. I don't know what's going to happen with Paul. He's not going to take this lying down. I nodded. I know. And we'll be ready. Joe's already looking into getting you some legal help. He says you need to file for legal separation, so Paul can't drag you further into his mess. She looked at me, her eyes wet but clear. I don't want to go back to him, Dad. I don't want Ben to ever think that's how family is supposed to be. I put a hand on her shoulder. He won't. Not while I'm still here. As the sun dipped low behind the pond, we sat together in that small, worn kitchen. Outside, the world might have been falling apart. But inside, we had each other, and that was enough. A few days after Lisa and Ben moved in, Paul's retaliation started. At first, it was just angry texts and voicemails, Paul calling her a traitor, accusing her of turning Ben against him. Lisa would sit on the couch, her phone in her hand, shaking as she read his messages out loud. He says I'm brainwashed by you, she told me one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. That I'm destroying our family. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice calm. He's trying to scare you, Lisa. He wants you to feel guilty so you'll come crawling back. Don't let him. Ben was in the living room, building a fort out of couch cushions and blankets. Every so often, he'd poke his head out and flash us a smile. It was like he knew we were in the middle of something bigger than he could understand, but he still wanted to remind us to breathe. Joe stopped by later that evening. He pulled me aside, away from Lisa and Ben. You need to tell her to document everything, he said quietly. Every message, every threat, save it all. If this gets ugly, she's gonna need proof. I nodded, feeling the weight of it. She's already so scared, Joe. I don't want to push her too hard. Joe put a hand on my shoulder. I get it. But she needs to protect herself. And Ben. I went back inside and sat down next to Lisa. She was staring at her phone, her shoulders hunched. Lisa, I said gently, I need you to start keeping everything he sends. Every text, every voicemail. We'll make a record. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. Do you really think it'll come to that? I hesitated, then nodded. I do. And if it does, we'll be ready. The next few days were tense. Paul drained their joint accounts, leaving Lisa's bank balance at zero. He sent her photos of the empty account statements, like it was some kind of sick game. Lisa's hands would shake whenever she checked her phone. He's trying to break me, she said one morning, her voice cracking. He wants me to beg. I put my hand over hers. You don't have to beg him for anything. We'll figure it out together. Joe came by again, this time with a lawyer friend of his, a no-nonsense woman named Carol who looked at Lisa like she was already family. She sat at our kitchen table with a stack of forms and a calm, steady voice. The first thing we do is file for legal separation, she explained. It'll protect you from any debts Paul tries to stick you with, and it'll make it easier to get a restraining order. Lisa nodded, her fingers white-knuckled on the pen as she signed the paperwork. Ben peeked around the corner, watching us with those big eyes of his. I gave him a small wave, and he smiled shyly before ducking back behind the door. After Carol left, I walked Lisa out to the pond. The water was still and smooth, the trees along the bank turning golden in the late afternoon light. You're doing the right thing, Lisa, I said quietly, even if it doesn't feel like it. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the water. I keep thinking about Ben, she said. I don't want him to grow up thinking this is normal, that it's okay to be treated like this. He won't, I promised. Not while he's here. Not while I'm still breathing. But Paul wasn't done. He started leaving notes on Lisa's car, ugly, threatening messages scrawled on scraps of paper. Once, I saw him parked at the end of the driveway, just sitting there in his car, staring at the house. I told Lisa to stay inside whenever Paul came around. I started sleeping with my old hunting rifle propped up by the front door, not because I wanted to use it, but because it made me feel like I had some kind of power in all this mess. One afternoon, after another one of Paul's drive-bys, Lisa sat down at the table with me, her voice shaking. I think it's time to file for a restraining order, she said. I can't do this anymore. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. We'll do it together, I said. And we did. Joe and Carol helped us fill out the paperwork, and the next morning, we filed it at the courthouse. Lisa looked so small standing there, but her eyes were steady. I stood beside her the whole time, like a wall she could lean on. Back at home, I watched Ben build another fort in the living room, his laughter echoing through the house. It reminded me that even in the middle of all this fear and anger, there was still something worth fighting for. Paul could rage all he wanted. He could drain bank accounts and leave nasty notes. But he couldn't take this from us. The warmth of this little home, the sound of Ben's laughter, the love that held us together. And I wasn't going to let him try. A week later, Joe called me early in the morning. His voice was low but urgent. Pete, I found something. You're not going to believe this. I felt my heart start to pound. What is it, Joe? Paul's been forging more than just Lisa's signatures, he said. I found a deed transfer with your name on it, your signature. Only it's not your signature, Pete. It's a fake. For a moment, the world went still around me. My hand tightened around the phone, and I had to take a breath before I could speak. He's trying to steal my house. Looks that way, Joe said. He used it as collateral for another loan. The papers are at the county clerk's office. I've already got copies. We need to take this to the district attorney, Pete. This isn't just fraud anymore. It's criminal. I closed my eyes, feeling a surge of fury that was hotter and sharper than anything I'd felt before. My home was the last thing I had left of my wife. The place we built together, the place we raised Lisa. The thought of Paul trying to take that from me, it made my hands shake. Do it, I said, my voice cold and steady. Take it to the DA. Joe didn't waste a second. That afternoon, he met with the DA's office. They took it seriously. Joe knew how to lay out a case, and the proof he'd gathered was rock solid. Within a couple of days, law enforcement was involved. They froze Paul's LLC and his accounts, launched a full investigation. When Lisa heard, she looked at me with a mix of relief and fear. What does this mean, Dad? She asked, her voice quiet. It means he can't hurt us anymore, I said. Not like this. He's crossed a line, Lisa. Now he has to answer for it. She nodded slowly, her shoulders finally starting to come down from the constant tension she'd been carrying. I'm scared, she admitted. But I'm also, I don't know. I feel like I can breathe again. That's what matters, I said. You and Ben, you're safe here. And Paul, he's going to face the consequences of what he's done. It wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't about the fishing trips Paul had stolen from me with Ben, or the afternoons he'd ripped away. It was about justice. About making sure Lisa and Ben didn't spend another day wondering if they were going to lose everything. That night, I sat on the back porch, the pond shimmering under the moonlight. I thought about all the years I'd worked in the machine shop, every bolt I turned and every part one made. I thought about my wife, her laughter echoing in this old house, and the way she'd always believed that family was worth fighting for. I realized then that this wasn't just about money or property. It was about taking back our lives. About standing up to the man who'd tried to turn our family into his personal piggy bank. The next morning, Lisa filed for full custody of Ben. With the fraud charges hanging over Paul's head and the restraining order already in place, it felt like the first time she had real ground to stand on. Carol helped her through the paperwork, her calm voice steadying Lisa's shaking hands. Ben didn't understand all the details, but he knew enough to know things were changing. That night, he crawled onto my lap, his small voice quiet in the stillness of the living room. Grandpa, he whispered, are we going to be okay? I wrapped my arms around him and kissed the top of his head. Yeah, buddy, I said softly. We're going to be just fine. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. It all came to a head one cold morning, a couple of weeks after Lisa had filed for full custody. The sun hadn't even fully risen when the call came in. Paul had tried to take Ben from school. Lisa's voice was breathless, panicked. Dad, he tried to take Ben from the school parking lot. The principal called me. They've got him in the office. He's been arrested. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you okay? Is Ben okay? We're both fine, she said, her voice shaking. Paul, he's not coming near us again. I promise you. By the time I got to the school, the police had already taken Paul away in handcuffs. His face was red with anger, but he didn't fight them. He didn't even look at me as they led him past. Lisa was in the principal's office, holding Ben close. Ben looked up at me with wide, scared eyes. Grandpa, he said, his voice so small. Why did he try to take me? I knelt down and took his hands in mine. Because he's scared, buddy. But you're safe. We're going to make sure of it. A few weeks later, we found ourselves in a courtroom downtown. The bank had sent their best forensic team, and they laid out every forged signature, every shady transfer, every lie Paul had spun. His defense lawyer tried to turn it around, tried to make it sound like Lisa was the one who'd been reckless, that she'd signed everything willingly. But the bank's evidence was too strong. And Lisa, for the first time in years, stood her ground. She told them how Paul would push papers in front of her, tell her it was just routine stuff, smile and say, trust me, honey. I sat in the back of that courtroom, my hands folded together, and I watched the truth finally come to light. When it was Paul's turn to speak, he didn't have that smug look he used to wear. He looked small, angry, sure, but more than that, he looked lost. Like he knew he'd pushed too far, and there was no coming back. The jury didn't take long. They convicted him on all counts: fraud, identity theft, even attempted kidnapping. The judge sentenced him to over 20 years in prison. Paul just stood there, his face pale, as the gavel came down. Afterward, Lisa sat down next to me on a bench outside the courtroom. She was crying, but it wasn't like the tears she used to cry. These tears were different, relieved, maybe even hopeful. I don't know what's next, she said softly, but I know we're done with him. We're finally done. I put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Whatever's next, you've got me and Ben. You're not alone anymore. Ben ran over from where he'd been playing with a toy car, his laughter ringing out in the empty hallway. Grandpa, watch this, he said, holding up the little car like it was a trophy. I smiled at him, feeling something inside me finally start to settle. That's pretty cool, buddy. Show me again. As we drove home that afternoon, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Ben smiling in the back seat, his car clutched tight in his hands. Lisa sat beside me, her head leaning against the window. The sun was setting over the fields outside town, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were really heading somewhere new. At home, we had dinner at the old kitchen table. Ben told me all about the race he'd made up for his toy cars. Lisa listened, her eyes soft and tired but bright. And me? I sat there, watching them, feeling more peace than I'd thought possible. Paul was gone, and his lies had finally stopped. In their place was something quiet and real, a chance for all of us to start over. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be nights when the fear would come back, when the what-ifs would hover in the dark. But we had each other. We had this little house by the pond, the place my wife and I built together, the place that had seen so much love and so much pain. And as I watched the sun sink below the water that night, I knew that was enough.